Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, where every show I talk to writers about their work, the publishing industry, and how they do what they do. The show is available by the same name on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms. And you could subscribe to either or to both, which is what I always suggest you do, so you never miss a thing. And you never want to miss a thing because every week I really do my best to bring you a great author to talk about their work, of course, but also, as I noted, the publishing industry. And this is a very solitary endeavor, no question. And so it's really nice, I think, for aspiring authors or wherever you're at on the career scale to hear directly from another author who's out there doing it and getting it done. And I've got a really great guest today, the author Richard Meredith, who has used his love and knowledge, I should say, of the sea to form the backbone of a series of very well-received standalone thrillers. His latest, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing it right, Maskirovka, came out in 2022 and deals with something we're sadly all too familiar with these days, Russian meddling in American politics and beyond. The novel received a starred review from Kirkus Reviews, which is not easy, and it made its list, it being Kirkus, the list of 100 best indie books of 2022. Those are really, really hard to achieve and very laudable feats. Richard, welcome to the Open Mic. How are you today?
Thanks for having me, Rich. It's great to be here. Just one little, it's Maskirovka with the
I
mask.
knew I was going to screw it up. See, that's
Otherwise, perfect. Thanks.
reading it. I'm fine, but the pronouncing of things. If you know me, you know that is my bugaboo in life.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. Names and pronunciations, boy, it's terrible. With a last name spelled like mine, you'd think I would always make it a point to get that right, but I still get it wrong. I don't know how that happens. Anyway, thanks for the correction. Let's start there actually, because as I noted, I think it's a very timely subject on the surface, of course, but then books are often years in the making. So tell me a little bit about that particular book and how it came to be.
That's really interesting because I actually started at about 2015 before Russian collusion was on anybody's lips and a ground war in Ukraine was unthinkable. I saw a couple of articles in one in Newsweek, one in the New York Times, and maybe three or four places about how the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, was infiltrating and funding certain green groups in the U.S. in order to stop, or, to impede U.S. production of oil because Russia depends on their exports for oil exports for about 70% of their GDP. So they saw this, our renaissance of our oil industry as a existential threat. And I thought, boy, that'd be an interesting book. So I thought, no, how can I make this into a novel? And I was just finishing up my other one, and I thought, this is interesting. And then of course everything happened after that. So, but yeah, it was actually I didn't foretell what was going on. I just got lucky.
Well, and often that is something a lot of writers have told me over the course of time. One of those questions I think writers get all the time is, where do you come up with your story ideas? And I know it really irritates some writers, but I mean, I think the reality is look around. I mean, pick up a newspaper once in a while or something. And there are a plethora of story ideas out there, and so many of them are based in real world events. And especially if you write crime or thriller, there is a never-ending pool, a very deep pool of story ideas. When you started working on the book, and then, as you noted, 2016 happened. Then later on, of course, what's happening in Ukraine started. I guess did it ever give you pause? Did you ever think, oh, okay, this was either great or maybe this is not so great for the timing of what it is I'm doing?
Yeah, it was. I had reservations about it. I thought so. I was chasing a story as opposed to a story coming to me type thing, and but then, I got into it, and as in most writing, you just enjoy what you're doing, and it just kept evolving from that. So I thought, let's just keep it going, and it changed. I think the focus changed several times during the draft, during the different drafts, but changing who the protagonist was and who the antagonist was going to be, but finally, I think it worked out okay as far as at the timing, because I was trying. This is not any kind of political screed at all. It's just kind of a neutral thing. So that's what I wanted to maintain.
Which I think is a legit concern, because it's another thing in this day and age. We're surrounded by political screeds, and we can't get away from them in really anywhere in the world these days. Almost anything can be turned into, a giant opinion machine. And so when you're touching on a sensitive, controversial, topical area, I think that it does raise the question, especially when you think about maybe marketing the book or what people might think of that book. Like I say, it sounds like, you went through a lot of different drafts and you changed some things around. Was any of that driven by the way events were going? Did you think, maybe I should change this because of what's going on out in the real world?
Not too much, because it was, because I was basing it on real events, so I couldn't much change that, because there are about 4 or 5 events in there that are actual things that did occur. I changed it around a little bit, things that the Russians did when U.S. Oil companies were in Moldova and other countries, what they were doing, and I just kind of switched that around a little bit, but not too much. Sometimes you have to take a risk and see what's going to happen, But,
well, in a way, like you referenced earlier, chasing the news a little bit, which you never want to do as a writer, but also not letting the news deter you from the story you want to tell, because at the end of the day, right? That's
right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Because the news is gonna get old sooner or later, and in the publishing industry, the book may be 3 years after the event.
Right.
And everyone's got a short-term memory on a lot of things.
Yeah, we count on that. I noted in the intro your love of the ocean, and you are a retired marine scientist and a wildlife biologist, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that. Because it seems like, as I noted, it certainly seems to be the backbone or inspiration for a lot of your storytelling. So, and I guess you were also, I don't think consultant, but you were involved a little bit in the oil industry as well, correct?
Yeah. I grew up in Flint, Michigan, and I grew up on episodes of Sea Hunt and Jacques Cousteau, and then so I had the Great Lakes, but man, I always yearned for the ocean. So as soon as I got in the Navy, I got to the West Coast, and it's kind of, my dreams were fulfilled. So I went to college at Hayward, and then my first job out of school, I was working for the National Marine Fisheries Service on the tuna boats during that. Remember the tuna dolphin controversy where they were catching? Well, I was one of the government observers on those boats, and which was actually kind of I weaved that story, or that job into my second novel. But so I did that for about 2 or 3 years, and off and on I worked in different marine science, doing monitoring of pipelines and monitoring of seismic studies, so they didn't affect marine mammals. So did that for about 30 years, and I was a consultant with a couple of consulting firms, and I had jobs in Ecuador during pipeline constructions down there, and also we did a couple of environmental restoration projects in the Amazon. And then we've done pipeline projects and pipeline pulls, monitoring those in the Delta and off the coast. Some of the platforms we've decommissioned. So I had that experience did that for about 36 years.
And the reason I ask that is, in this day and age, I think with Google Maps and Google Earth and everything, you can do an awful lot of stuff right without ever leaving your office. But I'm always fascinated by the folks who've been to so many of the places that are the locales that are in our stories. I don't think there's any replacement for that first-hand knowledge of getting to know people, getting to know landscapes, getting to see how being out on the open ocean, which I have a love-hate affair with the open ocean. I'd say my stomach has a love-hate affair with the open ocean. But I find all that really interesting, and how much of that really does. I got noted it was maybe the backbone of your storytelling, but you maybe beyond just the intrigue part of it. How much of that plays into your work as a writer?
Well, that's interesting, Rich, because often people just asked this weekend. I was at that Great Valley Book Fest, and I say, what comes first? The plot, the characters, setting, and in my case, I've had these experiences in the setting, and that kind of starts the story for me. Then I come up with a plot after that, and then I character, I do the characters. So I think setting has a lot to do with gets the ideas in my head. It's the germ of the idea, and then it's fertilized by the plot that grows and the characters that you put into it. I mean, the character is most important because that's what you keep going back to. But that first germ of an idea, I think, is setting.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, as when we're young readers, that's one of the things that captures us right away, because you haven't been anywhere, done anything when you're 10 years old. So you're I think it was the appeal of Jack London or Mark Twain, or John C. MacDonald or whoever, to take you to places that seem very exotic to you, even if they're maybe not so exotic when you get older. I want to ask you a question. I realized that today when I was looking over my stuff, I don't think I have ever asked a guest on this show this question. Now, it might seem like the most obvious thing ever, but I, honest to God, don't think I've ever asked this question in this way. So you're the first. We all get here a different route, but how did you actually decide to become a writer? What point did you say, I'm going to put my butt in the chair and I'm going to write this story?
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, because as a kid, I was not much of a reader. I think I took my first James Bond movie that I got interested in seeing a whole line of Ian Fleming books, so I started reading. And I've always been a writer, but it's always been technical, scientific reports, which is so boring because there's just no color, no personality. It's got to be objective as objective as you can make it, and there's just no personality to it. But I always loved, I loved reading, and there's several novels I couldn't stop reading. And every once in a while, you'd pick up a book and say, I wonder if I can do better than this. Because there's many out there that you think, how'd that get published? Not to knock anybody, but so I think I was kind of nearing the end of my career, and what am I going to do in retirement? And I've always wanted to write, so I thought, I'll give myself a test. I've written a couple of, sample chapters over the years, and I kind of brushed one off. It was about the tuna boats, and then all of a sudden, an idea came to me when I read something about the cocaine submarine. So so I guess it was just a confluence of events that really occurred. I was getting near the end, and I knew I wanted to do something in my retirement, and I love to write, and I love to write something that's I don't have to have footnotes and references. That can be fiction.
Well, so I'm a reporter by trade, and so that also, in spite of what some people might think, I don't write fiction as a reporter. It's definitely two different hats for me. I really, though having a little bit of experience writing fiction definitely does help with narrative flow when I'm writing a story.
Yeah.
All that being said, though, did you find it difficult to make that transition from writing technical, serious stuff with no color to saying, okay, now I need to put images in people's eyes. I can take a position. I can do all the things because I need this to enthrall people. Was that a challenge for you?
Yeah, it was, and it still is a little bit, because I'm saying, I said, well, you got to commit in a novel. You just can't waffle back and forth. It's got to be, the character's got to commit to doing something. And I tend to be verbose, and I have to cut down on my words in a novel because I'm always used to doing technical descriptions of something, and it's 15 pages on what a river's doing or what's going on in the ocean, and that's got to be cut back to like 2 sentences, So that was the editing was the big thing, because putting the words on paper was not a problem. It was getting down to meaningful words on paper.
Yeah, because I mean, especially in this day and age, I mean, every single word literally has to count. There's no room anymore to be verbose for sure. The 120,000 word crime story, that ain't gonna fly, man. Unless you're already Don Winslow or something, but
Right.
that's about it. And I want to ask this one too, because I think there was a time when we looked at self-publishing or indie publishing or even hybrid publishing, anything other than traditional publishing, as less than. And I'm so glad to see we don't do that anymore. And because I think it was really, especially as the industry has winnowed itself down to where, there used to be this many publishers. If you're seeing me online, I'm doing this. Now there's this many publishers, and it just has become so difficult to get that traditional publishing career going. So I'm really glad the indie publishing industry has stepped up, and we're seeing so many great writers and discovering so many great writers that way. How was that decision for you? What was the thing that made you say, I'm gonna take the responsibility of all this work that comes with going indie publishing?
Well, it started out with my first book, Skydance, about the kidnapping of the group down in Ecuador, and I did that through CreateSpace, which was Amazon at the time, because I sent out 200 query letters and and nothing, and so I thought, well, I'll try this CreateSpace, and they had editors and they helped me out quite a bit, and I have a local editor for that. I think I did, but anyway, so that's how I started. In my second book, The Crow's Nest, that's the one about the cocaine submarines and the tuna fleet. I decided I did the same thing again. Couldn't get any takers, couldn't get any agents. So I decided I had a little triage. I had agents I was going to go through. If that didn't work, then I was going to go through the publishers and the small publishers and independent if necessary. And I did get a small publisher but again, that was really. It's very indie because they do the publication, but you do all the marketing, you do all the work. So then for the third book for Maskirovka, it was under a different name at the time. It was called Leaving Yamal, which is the Yamal Peninsula where all the petroleum comes from in Siberia. And I actually did get an agent, and we had a year-long contract, and he tried to sell it to the Big Five and several, but he had no luck. So after a year, I just said, well, I'll make some changes to it and I'll go small publisher again. And this time I went with a smaller publisher, but it was also one I'm amping up a little bit. This one was on the approved list of the Mystery Writers of America, so that was a little bit. So now I'm working on my fourth, and I'm just starting to market it now. So I'm doing the whole process again to see if I can get an agent. If I can't, then I'm going to go up to a different publisher, or not maybe the same publisher, but I'm trying to go up the ladder, a step at a time.
You touched on a couple of things that I think are really key. The what you call the triage process. Same boat here. I absolutely have. Well, maybe backtrack just one step. In talking with other aspiring writers, the thing that I've come to believe and that I often share with people, if they care to know, is I think you have to know what you want in this business. You have to know what you want. The thing that will make you happy. If the only thing that'll make you happy is a Big Five contract and a New York City agent, great. Really hard, but great.
Yeah.
If you will be happy with something other than that, and there's maybe levels of that, I think that's great. I really do, because I say it all the time, so regular listeners will go, God, he's saying it again. But I think that kind of Big Five big success in this day and age, you're literally trying to hit a moving target from 500 yards with a blow dart, and maybe you'll do it and maybe you won't. But if you're going to be miserable if you don't do that, then I think I'm not sure this is the right thing for you, because it's so hard. So I really respect what you were saying about triaging, and also just continuing to push forward with that mindset and writing the stories you want to write. Because going back to what we were talking about earlier, I think many people get frustrated and then they just start chasing something they think is hot now.
Yeah.
Were you ever tempted to do that, or did you always just say, "Look, these are the stories I'm going to write, and then they're going to work out how they're going to work out"?
Yeah, I think it's for me. It's really what I write what I like to read. So I'm really not. I actually had one agent. Actually, one time I was, we're kind of flirting at the edges of doing a contract, and she wanted me to write children's book about caterpillars because I had a science background. I said, you know what? It's not really what I want to do. I don't have to do this for a living. I'm not doing it for a living. I'm going to be writing no matter what. But if I can be successful at it, great. But I'm going to be a writer regardless. So I really want to. I know what I want to write, and that's what I'm going after. I'm not trying to. If the market and what I'm writing coincide, that's great. But I remember a coach told me in high school, "I'll never hit major league pitching," and so. I may not make a big five, but I'm still going to write and I'm still going to enjoy what I'm doing because it's a kick. It's like I always tell people, I said, I'm basically lazy. And I say that writing is the hardest thing to start, the easiest thing to quit, but it's magic in between those moments.
Well, and one other thing too, you mentioned having the agent and then you have a contract and it doesn't work out. I think a lot of writers think once they've got an agent, they've got it made. I've had 3.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm not on any NYT best-selling list, right? That is just the reality of life. That I really appreciate your perspective because if you're not having fun, I don't know why you do this, right?
Yeah, it's right.
If you're not having a good time, because it is a solitary endeavor, and it's time away from your family in many cases, and you're putting other things off to do this. So, yeah, if you're not having a good time, I'm not really sure why you do it.
But I got to say though, and just like how we met, when you get together with the groups of writers at some of these conferences, it's the best time of your life. You talk to, I don't know if it's a support group or therapy or what, but misery loves company. But when you get with a bunch of mystery writers, it's just a kick. You have such great time with them, and you get so much, and it makes it worth it.
I would agree with that. And Richard's referencing we met earlier this year at Left Coast Crime in Tucson. Ran into each other again, of course, at BoucherCon in San Diego. And as we were joking, the irony of all that is we actually only live about 10 or 15 miles away from each other. But that's also writing because again, it's a solitary endeavor. It's one of those things that I really encourage writers wherever you're at on the spectrum in your genre. If there's conferences, specifically in your genre, I mean, general conferences are great too, but specifically in your genre, I think it's so worth it to take. You don't have to go every year or to every one, but if you can afford to go to one a year and intermingle with the other people trying to do the same thing you're trying to do, I have always discovered writers to be the most collegial, helpful group of people. Exactly. We don't see success as pie. If you're successful, that doesn't take away from my success. And a lot of folks are not like that. Writers are very much like that. I have found, and I don't know what's been your experience.
It's the one that most giving. You think that it'd be competitive and cutthroat, but it's just the opposite. You ask somebody for a blurb, they'll give you a blurb. You ask a review, they'll give you a review, and they always, great beta readers, and they're fun to be around. It's just because you have a shared experience and you had shared pain and shared joy, and it's just when you can talk about it like that, it helps out, especially the cocktail parties after. There was that's when the conversations begin to flow.
Yeah, that's when you learn just how much defeat we've all suffered through.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the things that I'm always the most interested in is crafting a great first line of your book. How do you feel about that? And if you think the same way I do, how much time do you spend crafting a good first line?
Oh, well, I'll tell you that someone once said to me, says, unless you get that first line, get them past the first line, the first paragraph, the first page, you've lost it. And every novel I pick up, I can tell by the first line, the first paragraph, if I'm going to like the book. And I know you can't tell a book by the cover, but you can certainly tell it by the first chapter, usually. And so I really do. I work on the first line a lot. I'll have several alternatives, run it by my critique group, my beta readers. But yeah, I struggle at it because I think that's that opening scene has really got to capture somebody. You got to capture, the story, the protagonist, the conflict. You can get that into in the first line, boy, you've got it made.
It really is, I think, a really critical thing, especially with mystery writers. You are saying a lot in that, and we remember great first lines from literary history, call me Ishmael or what have you. There's so many, but there was a time when you could have taken a couple of chapters to get to who is Ishmael and why is Ishmael saying you can call me that. That isn't how it works anymore. You're saying you got to get to it, man. And so I think that first line is really important. And I'm glad that I'm not the only person who thinks that.
Yeah, and you suffer over that one because that's your first impression to make a first impression, right?
Right. So you mentioned marketing, and of course, I think in this day and age, unless your name rhymes with Don Winslow or Stephen King, you're even if you are with a big traditional publisher, you're going to do a lot of the marketing on your own, probably most of it.
Yeah.
And it's certainly when you go independent or small publisher, you're pretty much guaranteed you're going to do all of it. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy to marketing. Do you work with a publicist? Are there things that, you always do, things you never do? How do you approach getting your book and your name out there?
Well, I'm, we talk about Jim Latoile is like, he's my mentor for how things are done, on social media. I mean, and Terry Shepard, how they just saturate things. And I'm really kind of reticent. So I'm just getting into doing that. I've actually got a woman that's doing some Facebook and some Amazon ads for them. We're doing some experiments to see which ones work. And most of mine, though, have been through, social media and then, appearances at book signings and book launchings. And I was at the Great Valley Book Fest in Manteca doing some retail sales this weekend. And weekend before, I was back in my hometown of Flint, Michigan, because I had I don't want to tell you what high school reunion it was, but it's getting up there. And I made arrangements with a local bookstore to have a signing there. And so a bunch of my friends from high school came, who I never get to sign books for, So I do a lot of retail. I try to get to as many things as I can, and but that's been most of it, And then going to I don't sell that many books at the conferences because it's just so saturated at the bookstores. I always have books for sale there, but it's just not a big marketplace. I'm buying more books than I'm usually selling. You know how that goes.
Right.
But I think it's just you're waiting for that one little thing that'll get your name out there. And so I just keep trying everything I can,
Social media vexes me a little bit when it comes to marketing stuff because I've seen a lot of writers who do a big saturation campaign on social media, but that's all they do. Everything seems to be a pitch to buy their book.
Yeah.
And, I don't know how typical I am. I know for me, that doesn't get me. In fact, it kind of repels me away from that. I'm far more inclined toward authors who engage a little bit with their readers in a different way. Like every pitch isn't about buying the book. It might be about something else. I've seen some writers be very engaging with, asking, what is it that you read? Or what, what other, what books drove you to discover my book? Or something like where they're engaging people. And I don't know if it sells any more books, but I know as a consumer of social media stuff, I find that more interesting. You noted just now, you're a little more reticent in that area. I mean, as a consumer of these things, what attracts you most when because we all see the book ads all the time and book pitches. What pitches appeal to you as a reader? It's a long-winded way of asking you what pitches appeal to you as a reader.
Yeah. There's always going to be that one group that the author, you're going to go back to them. But for a new writer or one I haven't read before, gosh, it's that again, it's that tagline that they've got for their book, and the cover, and something to draw my attention, and that again, it's not the first sentence, but it's their tagline and their synopsis. That's what's going to capture me. So if I can get a little bit of that, and I think I'm really when I see someone that puts in the time and effort to do a really good 10, 15, 20-second video that kind of encapsulates the book, that kind of social media advertising, that's effective on me. You know, at least I may not pick it up right away, but you know, it's just like one of those. All right, got to think about that. That may be one I'm going to take a look at down the road.
You know, one of the other things that has worked certainly on me in the last year or so, some of the authors speed dating at the conferences.
Yeah.
I was really impressed with both of them. Now, the speed dating things I've been involved with at conferences before had always been with agents,
Yes.
and that's very different, very, very different. And I've talked about it a lot on this show, so if you're a regular listener, I'm sorry, but the agent speed dating is, you know, you're trying to get an agent, but the author speed dating was a great way to learn about some new books. And actually, there are a couple of folks that have been or are coming on the show that I met through that process and discovered their book. As you know, it's these little things there, right? And that's what speed dating is to me. It's like it's a 20-second, or in this case a 2-minute trailer on this book.
Yeah.
And I was impressed as hell that authors like Heather Graham and Ann Hillerman, and these are people who've sold a gobstop of books, and they are still doing the speed dating and connecting with their audience. I was really impressed at that. And so I don't remember. Were you doing the speed dating?
I did. Yeah, they're still doing the heavy lifting. I like that. Yeah, I did, and it was really interesting because I've done it before at Left Coast Crime. I think we did a speed dating. I think it was. Yeah, and so that was the first time I'd done that. And then so this time I felt like, oh well, you know, I've had a little experience, and there was a woman who I was teamed with, and she had never done it before. And I was talking to her beforehand. I said, "Well, just get it down. You know, if you think it's long, cut it. You know, even then, cut it again. You know." And she gets up there the first time, and she nails it. And I'm stuttering, trying to get my pace going. It took about 2 tables before, but it's amazing how some people are just a natural at that. You know, and she was. And
it's a challenging construct for a lot of people. There are however many tables, 20, 30 tables.
Yeah.
So you're going to each one giving the same pitch over and over and over again. And I can only imagine that by, the 15th table, you've either got it down and it's rote, or you're hoarse and you can't talk, and you barely can get anything out.
Okay. And I took, like I said, took 2 tables, and I had my pace going, but and then the little giveaways, you have to have something, like a bookmark or something. And people give such unique ideas on little giveaways at the table. But you can connect with let's see, 20 tables, 200 people, 300 people in the course of an hour and a half. So that's significant.
Yeah, that's really, really something. So what's the most creative thing you think you've ever done to market a book? And I ask because I have a friend who's a very successful sports biographer, been on the New York Times bestsellers list many times. One of his books was made into an HBO TV series. I mean, he's really done well. And he still will do things like taking a signed copy of his book and putting it under a seat at Dodger Stadium or something along those lines. Have you ever got really creative with any of your marketing efforts?
I always have these bunch of postcards and bookmarks. Okay. And every flight I'm on, I don't care if it's going to Europe or whatever, I always put them in the sleeves next to me, and hopefully someone will pick them up. I know I've given a couple of books away to flight attendants. I said, hey, if you have a layover, maybe you want to take a look at that. But then again, that's more one-on-one. I'm always looking for new and creative ways, but they're usually not my ideas.
Hey, wherever the inspiration comes from, right? It really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
How do you see the industry today in regard to how it treats writers? And I used to ask this question in the form of how it's changed over the decades, but that really isn't relevant. What's relevant is today. So, how do you see the industry now in terms of how the publishing industry treats authors?
Yeah. I have a very positive view of it. I mean, I know when it comes to agents and the big five and that, it's a whole different ballgame, because they're not, you may have a great book and it may be a wonderful story, but they may have another author already doing that, or they've got a series doing that. or it may not be the right time for that. There's another flow going through. So then again, you're just kind of trapped in, the tide, either you're in it or you're not. But being independent or, small publishers, they're much more open to it. And there are so many more now. And self-publishing or independent publishing is becoming so easy. And you see remarkable, you see big authors now that are dumping agents and the big publishers because they've got such a big name, they can do it on their own, And of course, then the profit margins, I'm not in it for profit, but, it goes from like maybe, 10, 15, 20% a book, really, that's a lot, to, 90 to 100%, profit on a book if you're doing it independently after you pay for your editors and book and all that and the costs. So, I think that's a great opportunity. It's crowded field, there's not no doubt about that, but never a better opportunity. I remember the story about Stephen King when he first started out. He sent out, I think, like 150 or 200 query letters before he had a first take, but at that time, he was typing the letters
Mm-hmm.
and Xeroxing the manuscript to send it along and then mailing them. We can do that in 10 seconds. We can have,
Right.
30 things out. It's just, so that was hard work back in those. It's easier now, but there's a lot more competition now too.
Yeah, it's the yin and the yang of it all. Yes, it's much easier. There's many more avenues to go, but those are available for everybody. So
Yeah.
yes, the competition, very, 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 very intense. I should have asked you this earlier. Actually, I meant to ask it earlier because you just referenced the series. A lot of crime or mystery or thriller authors, that's the first thing they go to, is they write. Their first book is always intended, hopefully, to become a series. Did you ever think about going that route, or are you thinking about going that route with any future work?
Well, in the beginning, no, because I just had these discrete stories I was trying to tell, and then, but Maskirovka is actually the start of at least a 3-parter, but because the second one's done, called the Double Cross of Bridget, which I'm trying to market now, and then there's another one I'm working on. But interestingly, when I was at my reunion, someone said that, "Oh man, I really like that character in Crow's Nest. Are they going to come back again?" And I thought, well, I never thought about that, but maybe so. But no, didn't think about it until the third one, and then I started thinking it. I watched how one of my favorites is Daniel Silva in his series on Gabriel Allon, and I loved how, through the 20 books, how he can take a backstory that you read in the beginning, which was like 3 or 4 pages, and he gives you that whole backstory now in like a paragraph. But even for the new reader, he's got the full tilt of it. And I thought, well, that's really a nice little trick to be able to do that. So you can have these characters carry through, but not have to have a full backstory. Just have this kind of abbreviated one. And I thought, yeah, if you can do that, then you have just have to worry about the main plot. So I'm thinking about it.
We will be keeping an eye out. What, for you as a reader, makes for a really good thriller? We talked about plot, we talked about setting, to some extent, characters. We've referenced all those briefly, but is there any one of those or something else that makes a really great thriller for you as a reader?
If it makes me an insomniac, it's a good book. I love a book that I just cannot put down. And I'm partial to beach reads, like something fast and it's adventurous and that. But there's some of those books that you just say, oh my God, how did he come up with that? Just the awe of the author, putting that together. And it's just the entertainment value. And then I love it when there's because of my science background, I love it when they throw in the technical stuff and I can follow through on it, and it's accurate, and it makes the story flow as opposed to being a hurdle to the story. So that's right. But
that classic page turner. I know. It's doing this. I read lots and lots of authors, and I'm just in awe of the talent out there sometimes, or people to spin words in a way where I just think, wow, that just knocks my socks off, right? I just can't put this book down. That is a great feeling as a reader.
Yeah. And you say, how do they find that perfect word that
Yeah,
describes perfectly that emotion or that situation? You know, you say, man, you're scouring the thesaurus trying to find the right word. And all of a sudden that, yeah,
yeah.
it's the magic.
Its creation in your head is just
Yeah.
awesome. Um, only have one more serious question. Who inspired you as a reader? Now, you noted you weren't much of a reader when you were younger, but something clearly sparked that at some point. Who was the first author that really captured your attention and you said, wow, I got to get another of their book and another and another.
Well, that's actually that's an interesting story because it was my parents would go to the golf club on these on Sundays, and I wasn't much of a golfer. I played baseball and that, so I was bored. And I was like 12 or 13, and back in those days, you could get on the bus and go to downtown Flint. We had two theaters, and one was the Capitol, and the other one was the Palace. And I went to the first one, and it was, I don't know what it was, but I went to the Palace, and they had this movie called From Russia with Love. And I'd never heard of James Bond, never heard of Ian Fleming. And I just, that movie just knocked my socks off. So I'm back at the Woolworth store waiting for the bus, and they had a little bookstore there. And usually I'm looking for like, Ted Williams, How to Hit a Baseball, or Doak Walker, How to Kick, whatever. And they had a whole line of Ian Fleming, James Bond books. And I think there was probably 3/4 or maybe 4/5 of them were done by then. He'd written a couple after. But that summer, I read each one of those books. And that got me sparked. And I was paying it forward to all my friends. I'd read it and give it to them and stuff. And so that's when I started reading seriously. And then I guess I can't even remember, flash forward probably 10 years. I got into you mentioned John D. McDonald. I thought, I want to be Travis McGee someday. I want to live on that houseboat in Fort Lauderdale. And I love those books, So that was a series I really enjoyed. But there was a lot of them in between. Michael Crichton was really, I just totally enjoyed him because the science behind it and all that. And I remember reading this article about I was in New York City visiting my cousin. This had to be 69 or 70, and she lived in Queens, and she had a book that was called by Jeffrey Hunter called A Case of Need. And it just won the Edgar that year, the previous year, and I started reading. It was a great book, and I kind of stuck in my head. And then about 10 years later, I'm reading about Michael Crichton. He wrote that under a suit. He wrote the book under the Jeffrey Hunter pseudonym.
Oh,
because
wow.
he was a student at Harvard Medical School, and he thought the professors would think low of him if he's writing novels while he's in medical school.
Think low of him. The man wrote a book while he was in medical school.
Several. I think he wrote several under different pseudonyms. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be just the opposite. Like, you found time to write a really good series of books while you were in medical school.
Yeah.
What super genius are you, man?
And then
Clearly he was.
Yeah, he was definitely.
Well, you mentioned Ted Williams. I don't know if you can see over my shoulder. My
Oh yeah, I see Ted. Yeah.
I read every word ever attributed to Ted Williams that I could ever find.
Yeah.
I was a baseball guy too. So My Turn at Bat,
Yeah.
Science of Hitting, articles in Esquire, the Robert Kramer's great profile on him in Esquire in the early 70s.
Yeah.
One of the most fascinating characters ever. I haven't read Lee Montville's book. Lee Montville? I think it's Lee Montville's biography of him yet. Fascinating character. So it's always something, right? There's always something. Everybody's got a hook. They just don't know what it is. Or sometimes we don't get it, but it's always so gratifying when that hook gets you.
Yeah.
And that was my intro, was reading it for anything there was about baseball. I read everything I could, right? And I still do to some extent, but I was reading about Ted Williams. So it's interesting you mentioned.
Well, I used to look at the old Sears catalog and see where Ted would be in the catalog, for the stuff he used to sell for the. My wife and I just finished up. We were just in May or June. We finished up our 30th Major League Baseball park in Houston. So we've seen them all.
Oh, congratulations. That's I think I've been to 16.
Yeah.
So getting to all 30, that seems like a really
we actually did 31 because the Rangers built their new stadium since we started, so we had a new covered one, and so we did the Texas two-step while we were there.
Oh, well, that's awesome. I'm envious.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, I like to end on a fun question. As I always say, I intend for it to be a fun question anyway. Let's say I had the power to put you together with one of the following three people for, dinner, a drink, conversation, whatever suits you. Which of these three would you choose and why? I have a pretty good idea, but I'm gonna give you all three here. Mikhail Gorbachev, Jacques Cousteau, or the very infamous pirate Blackbeard. Together with just one of those three people.
Yeah, it would be Cousteau. Blackbeard is enticing, but Cousteau would be it. That guy had an interesting life. I mean, he invented scuba. He invented the aqua lung, and I was a fanboy when I was a boy. So yeah. But that reminds me. I remember on the same note, I remember Johnny Carson used to ask, or someone asked him, if you were stuck on a desert island, who would you want to be as your be there with you? And everyone always say, oh, some exotic. He said, the world's best boat builder. Yeah, great line.
That's a home run. That's a home run right there. Well, Richard Meredith, thank you so much for taking some time and joining me today on the open mic. It's been a lot of fun having this conversation. I highly recommend, folks, if you haven't seen Richard's work, go out and find it if you're here in the Northern California area, certainly at there it is, Maskirovka. Did I say it right that time?
Maskirovka, yep. Yeah.
Hey, there you go. I'm a fast learner. Go to places like Face in a Book which is in El Dorado Hills, or your local bookstore. If they don't have it, ask them for it. And if you see Richard somewhere around Northern California, ask him for it. He'd probably be happy to sign a copy for you. So, my last spiel, I always end the show. Sorry, I always end with the same spiel, which is, if you haven't hit subscribe, now would be a great time to do that. If you haven't left me a review, that would also be very deeply appreciated. It helps people find the show. It helps people connect with authors like Richard and learn a little bit about this industry and about what it takes to take your work from your brain through your fingers onto the keyboard and out there into the bookstores, which is where you ultimately would like it to go. So yeah, help somebody else find the show. And hopefully if you appreciate the show, somebody else will as well. The only other thing, it's the same thing as always. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please make today count. Until then, for my guest, Richard Meredith, and myself, Rich Eisen here, this has been The Open Mic. We'll see you next time.